Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. It's great to be here with these folks here. And we really want to start the four pillars, of course: talent, infrastructure, investment, and technology. Want to start talking about talent first. I'm going to start with you, Jonas, on this one, because this is something you've written about, the idea of learnability, the idea about upskilling. What do you mean by that, and what sort of responsibility do you think employers have in terms of that area?
Well, part of this day has been, really encouraging from the aspect of talent, because I think ever since we began our morning with Dr. Khan, Dr. Crow, Brian Ferrer for lunch, Fred Smith, everyone has talked about access to skilled talent as being an absolute necessity for our nation to be competitive. And in actual fact, it is true not only for the US, but true for all of the developed world as well as the developing world, because the labor markets are being affected by structural changes: technology, globalization, demographics, so an aging workforce, an aging population in developing and developed countries alike, individuals making different choices based on changes in environments, and organizations thinking about organizational agility in a very different way. So all of this translates into a bifurcation of the workforce. And I think it was Dr. Crow who talked about this morning, that out of the US workforce, there's 70% of the workforce that is fully employable and has the right skills to participate and be competitive in the economy, and the 30% of our workforce and population that is not participating. So the biggest challenge that is facing us to be competitive is going to make sure that we as a nation have access to a broad pool of skilled workforce. And we know today that 30% of the workforce has low or is unskilled or does not have enough skills to participate and be successful in a global competitive environment. So that will be the defining challenge of our generation, to figure this out. Because as Brian Ferrer talked about during lunch, if it's a very complex, structurally driven global issue, there's not going to be a simple answer, because we've known about this and we've seen indicators of our performance in terms of skills compared to our global peers as nations, for quite some time. So this is not new, but we've not really been able to make the turn. And in actual fact, I would argue that the current trends of bifurcation of the workforce, the polarization between the haves and the have-nots, based on the skills that they have to productively contribute to the growth of organizations and to our economy, is going to accelerate. And there's no indication that it's going to, mitigate and or, converge at this point. So that's what's going to be so important for us to figure out.
And Carol, one of the things that's going on, Jonas talks about this bifurcation in terms of the workforce. One of the things that also seems to be going on is a decline in investment, federal investment, in terms of science. Is that a trend you see reversing? Has it stalled? I mean, where do you see things now?
Well, I get to start off with some good news, because just 2 days ago, Congress did pass legislation that was going to increase NIH by about $4.8 million for some very important targeted areas, and $4 billion, and another $4 billion on an annual basis. And I think that for all of us, that is good news, and we're excited about it. I think that the needs are greater and the opportunities even greater. And I think that's where we start thinking about how can that investment be understood? Can we do a better job making clear that if an investment comes back, people have been arguing, that we can make clear that that investment isn't only going to help, it's critical. So I think of it as being an investment in the workforce. We can probably talk about that more, but universities are places where in these areas of science, technology, that's where the young people get excited. They get the skill sets. We made a bet in America after World War II that if we brought innovators into universities where they were also teaching young people, we would create the entrepreneurial mindset necessary to stay great. When the money starts drying up, those people have a harder time doing what they do. They tend to retrench and not be as, they become more risk adverse. They also tend to become less likely to increase the embrace of lots of different areas. So that talent force changes, the idea force changes. And so another piece of good news is that it's related to bad news. Last year, NIH had 50,000 proposals. And I'm going to tell you, I'm a reviewer, as are many people in this room. At least 25,000 of them had amazing work in them. If you run a business where you're throwing out 25,000 great ideas every year, you have to start wondering about your business model. But if we start increasing that even a bit, we've got people ready. So if the money comes in, we're not in a position where we have a desert of ideas. So it has that. It has the capacity to really fuel economies. And I know all my colleagues out there could say they had these studies, but a little bit of fuel from the government. For example, at Chapel Hill, we did a big study. For every dollar we get from the federal government, we generate $7 to $9 in additional research money that goes to fuel research, back to the economy. We hire 100,000 people in the state. So I mean, I could go on about that, but I think the good news is that should these investments increase, we're ready. The bad news is that if they don't, these pipelines that are holding on could hit a point where it's going to be a lot harder for them to actually take advantage of what is sitting ready for us as a nation to use for competitiveness.
Mike, I want to go to you on this, another pillar, infrastructure. And Deloitte's certainly done research in terms of the manufacturing sector, and a lot of obviously emphasis on that in terms of this new administration coming in. And you guys have specifically done research on vulnerability of infrastructure in terms of cyber attacks, something I hadn't necessarily thought of. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure, Nia. And apologize for my voice. I came down with a cold this morning, so
it's kind of sexy.
I don't sound that great.
Very sexy.
It's a very interesting dynamic, because what we're seeing that right now innovation is the pillar of growth. I really love what Bron said at lunchtime around the fact that you must be innovative, and Carol said about the entrepreneurship. But what we're seeing is what happens clearly is the ability that human error, cybersecurity, becomes an open issue with innovation. And the conundrum that any company has is you don't want to stifle innovation, and therefore you have to keep going. And especially in the manufacturing sector, as things get more complex, using ecosystems. So not only developing your own product, but working with other partners to develop a product and bring it to market. You're only as good as your weakest link, and you can't really secure yourself against human error. But it really does start, number one to me is tone at the top. And I think every organization, from the board to the executive, needs to have cybersecurity at the top of their list. Everything they do, they have to make sure that not only are they supporting innovation, but they're doing it in the word I use is a harmonized way, making sure that they're sitting back and looking at their cybersecurity procedures and continually to look at them. Because it's not something that you could put together once, put on a shelf, and then not remember it. They need to be updated. Every time there's a breach, they find something else out. But you can't stifle innovation. Right. Like Bron said, it's really important. Things are getting more complex, more globalized, using ecosystems. So it's really a balance of how do you push forth innovation while at the same time watching for cyber risks.
And Jim, I wonder if you could talk about America in relation to where other countries are in terms of investment in infrastructure. We talked about sort of this global economy and this global race towards innovation. Where is this country?
Yeah, thank you, Neva. And I think I'm going to build a little bit on what Fred Smith said this morning. And I think as you try to drive your innovation globally, you have to really assess the ecosystem globally that you're going to participate in, and because that ecosystem determines the receptivity and the capacity to commercialize your ideas globally. And over the last 30 plus years, The primary underpinning of the system that we've used is called TRIPS, the Trade-Related Intellectual Property System underpinning WTO. And what was happening through TPP, which Mr. Smith was advocating, is generally called TRIPS Plus. And Europe, with TTIP, said, I'm not in for TRIPS Plus. I want TRIPS. And China says, I'm more interested in TRIPS Minus. I mean, I'm not trying to be pejorative, but you can make a fair case for that, and I'm simplifying a little bit. And then you have a new administration that's saying, I don't like TRIPS Plus. Is that because it's not good enough? I want TRIPS Plus Plus, or because TRIPS wasn't right, and I want to look at something else. So this is an uncertain environment to commercialize in. They're rivalrous. It's mercantilist. I find it highly unlikely they're going to come together in the near term. And so this is a different situation for commercializing globally in the next decade than we've known in the past 30 years. I study these things a fair bit. One study I engage on it, I should say. One study which is very interesting for your chair is in ag tech patents. Last year, 92% of all ag tech patents from university research were from China. So they published over 1 million patents. So this is a land grab, and good game theory is stay out of the game until you get enough land and then come back in, which is rivalrous and mercantilist. I personally believe this is the most pressing issue to globalizing right now, because the rule systems are diverging and becoming quite political. Evidence what's happening in the election and the relationships to the East and to the West, and all of their turbulence and nativism. So I think this is going to be central to figuring out how we commercialize ideas in the next decade.
And Carol, I wonder if you could talk about one of the things that the Obama administration has tried to do is put a focus on STEM education, primarily focusing on women, bringing more women into the field, encouraging girls to go into STEM fields. Has that mattered at all? Have you seen a difference in terms of conversations around that, or in terms of interest?
Well, I think everyone that is in higher ed spends a lot of time trying to think about these disparity gaps, about the changing demography of America, and the fact that we look around this room or we look around the rooms in higher education at the top, most of us look the same. And there aren't that many that look like me, and there's even fewer that look like a lot of our students. And so we think a lot about bringing them in. I do think, even going back to Title IX, that's had a big influence in bringing diversity into our infrastructure and our research. A lot of the best examples of the value of diverse research teams actually come from entrepreneurial areas, where they talk about you put 6 people in a room that all come from the same background, you get the same idea. You put 6 people with 6 different ideas, 6 different backgrounds, and you're going to get something that is really dynamic. I think this goes back to me about investment. One of the great ways investment in research, and I'm talking mostly university research, but it's all research. One of the things it does is it does give us a chance to also address other societal problems. We use that research to develop a diverse team of young people who start fueling as they move up with ideas like the way the Obamas did it, or universities, where you get more and more people, you're going to see the diversity of the ideas increase, and we have a chance very much to start also reducing those income disparities that go with people thinking that they're limited to disciplines in certain, that women can't do science, or students of color can't become engineers. As we erase those boundaries, we start doing immense good, not only for the science, the STEM that we're doing, but also for the goal that we have to diversify the workforce and make the talent pool so much more energetic. So I think they go together.
Jonas, you want to jump in?
Well, and I believe not only are we making it much more energetic, and I think the business the clear business case is that diversity of thought drives better business outcomes. The participation of women, depending on where you are in the world, is either lower or significantly lower than that of men, but in almost all of those cases, the level of education for the very same women is higher than it is for men. So if you think about a demographic that is shrinking in all of the developed world, all countries in Europe have a shrinking population with one exception, which is France. We are holding our own, but within our own country, roughly the same demographic tendencies are occurring depending on ethnicity. So our need to bring in skilled talent into the workforce is huge, and women is actually the biggest untapped pool of skilled talent that is not fully utilized today to varying degrees in developed countries, and that's certainly the case also here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And there also seems to be, Jim, sort of a turn away from globalism and thinking that America is part of this larger economy in terms of immigration, in terms of bringing talent in. I mean, is that going to affect kind of diversity if there's this shrinking away, Jim, from thinking that America, is part of this global economy?
Oh, I think there's without a doubt a talent war, no question. But I think America does exceptionally well because of the quality of their education institutions and the base of their companies. So you have a bit of an embarrassment of riches, but of course it can never be good enough. But how you manifest that, there was a comment from the Gallup gentleman who said, though there's more innovation, business formation and dynamism is going down. So I do think how you manifest all this into prosperity and productivity, I believe the gating element is much more infrastructure, personally, because as Dr. Folt said, there's a lot of talent out there and not the infrastructure to receive it in her case. So I mean, that's more in a research thing than at a business formation, but I think it's a pretty good metric. So I think the infrastructure is a very, very important piece to look at. And I think, again, I'm trying to build off of things like Mike talked about the cyber. People are all excited about blockchain, and it's really great because it allows all this stuff, but it also allows people to do things without being tracked. So a lot of these things raise complex issues all along the way.
Yeah,
right.
Mike?
One thing, the question about STEM, what we realized in the business environment is we've been a huge proponent on STEM. The majority of our businesses at Deloitte need science, technology, mathematicians, but we're down into high schools now. Mm-hmm. We have to start earlier and earlier. We're talking about programs for freshmen in high school because we believe that now. When you start internships in sophomore years of college, it's not good enough.
Right.
We have to start much, much younger. And so we've been investing, and that was probably a big aha that we've had. And if you speak to the younger generation, people in their 20s who have joined us in the past 5-6 years, they look at things totally differently than someone my generation looks at it. And they believe that you have to start early. You have to start getting those diverse skills, embedded much, much early. So we're putting in programs now looking at as early as freshmen in high school now.
Yeah.
A totally different than when I started.
Yeah. I don't. Does anybody have questions in the audience?
Yeah, I have maybe something to add to what Mike said. When we talked about skill shortages, as we survey employers all over the world and also here in the U.S. around, their need for talent and whether they think they can find the talent in labor markets. And what we see today is that 40% of the employers we survey here in the U.S. are saying they have difficulty finding talent. What's encouraging is that almost 50% of the same employers are now saying that they are investing in training for their workforce. Mm-hmm. Whereas the same answer would have been, a 20% of employers saying that they had a hard time finding people, but only 12% were investing in the development and training. And that, I think, is going to be key, and it comes back to the question you asked at the very beginning. Organizations will have a responsibility and a self-interest in making sure that they develop training and development for the workforces that they have. But longer term, we believe that the best predictor of employability may well be something we call learnability, so the desire and the ability to learn. Because we've talked a lot about the changes that are occurring in markets through changes in globalization and how the mechanics are changing and the different forces. And it's going to be very difficult for employers and educational institutions to predict what the skills are going to be 18 years out, that are going to be specifically on the hard skills that are going to be needed. Of course, STEM skills are always going to be in demand in a digitized world. But so the ability to have a workforce that is used to acquiring new skills as they go along will protect us and will render us and make us even more competitive through the time. And we think that that's going to be a key driver of employability, and we think it can be one of the biggest drivers of competitive advantage. If we crack that, we will have a workforce that will stay competitive, not only be, in phases competitive and then having to catch up like is the case right now.
Right. Dr. Folt?
I love what you're saying, because I think one of the ways we talk about at universities now is we need to develop a whole generation. I love the idea earlier that competitiveness might be measured at a big metric, but it only builds from a lot of individuals. And those individuals that develop the skills of a researcher, the synthesis, the probing, the grit, you hit a wall, you turn, you have an empty canvas as an artist, you build something new. Those are what we used to do the best anywhere. I think that was the real surge in America. Right. And if we dry up those pipelines, we really do dry up that inventiveness. So by fueling it and doing it in such a way that we build those partnerships, we actually start every single student, every single learner has that capacity to be that innovator. And I think that's part of the good news too, is that the investments that it takes is actually small. So what is NIH is 30 billion, the healthcare is 3 trillion. These are, someone said, rounding errors. Each company has capacity to build these partnerships with universities in ways that can be amazingly transformational for every single individual. And if we don't do that, though, we don't have a chance to really expand this at the rate and speed we want to. Right. Universities have a lot of real estate, for example. We're starting to share that with business partners and bring them in. We've got this capacity to do it, and I think we're at this moment where a little bit, especially given the willingness to reach across the sectors, seems to be at a point that it really could escalate. But it needs that intention that I think meetings like this give us when we come together and talk about it.
And Jim, in terms of what you would want to see in terms of emphasis and investment and moving forward from the private sector, from the government sector, in terms of partnerships, what do you want to see and what do you expect to see?
Well, I think our CEO, Deborah, said it earlier today that innovation has had unequal distribution elements to it, and so I think you realize when you don't pay attention to that, it rears itself in surprising fashions, and now everybody's grappling with that. So I think everybody sold this stuff as trickle down, and everybody would get a fair shake, and in fact, it didn't work out that way within states and between states. And I think that's a lot of reason why people are pulling back right now, and I'm not trying to just say, oh, let's just spread everything to everybody, but I think the inattention to the investments in distribution, it's not a justice thing, but you could make it that case. I think it's a functioning society thing, and so I think that's really, really important. There's no end of possible innovation things you can invest on. You've heard them all today, and they're very, very compelling, each and every one of them. I do believe that how this is going to work in the world, you've seen how Europe's pulling back, you've seen the rattling with China, you've seen TPP go up and go down, and people saying, come on, bring it back up again. I think that's going to gate a lot of this really good talent and this really good desire to invest, and I think the new administration is going to be overwhelmed with the things they have to do. So I would say distilling these things into clear priorities would be the thing that I would think would be the most constructive thing to do in 2017 with this new administration, and that's going to be drinking water from a fire hose and try to get it to some kind of manageable way that you can move ahead on it.
And Mike, what's your sense?
I actually agree with what Jim said. I would say, though, that from a business perspective, there's a challenge between looking at innovation and not tying it to kind of a short-term P&L look at it. Innovation is long-term. And I think at our firm, I know one of the challenges we give ourselves is the ability to, innovation isn't a yearly thing. It could take something 5, 6, 10 years. And you have to, if you get behind something, you have to stick with it. There's opportunities at times, the market changes, financial changes. First thing people do is want to cut investments.
Right.
And really, it's really the long-term investment. Now, to your point, you have to be able to call something, if it's not going to work, it's not going to work. And you have to be able to call it. Everything that's innovative doesn't mean it's going to work. And the ability to seed out what is going to work and what not going to work, and if it is going to work, invest in it long. And that's what sometimes we're very short-sighted.
Yeah. Dr. Folt?
I'd love to say something about that. Because I think one of the ways universities have a different model than businesses is that we have to invest also in the discovery-based long-term. So big example, Zika virus. We would be nowhere on Zika virus right now had we not had researchers studying all sorts of things that had nothing to do with Zika virus. And then when it comes up, those 10 individuals across the country who had been working along on that were there. Another example is CRISPR. This whole movement towards complete rethinking in transformative medicine might have started 30 years ago, I was hearing, by someone who was actually looking at viruses and bacteria. It didn't look like anything, but it took 30 years, and suddenly we are on the cusp of the biggest invention. So I'm really glad you said that, because we need to help the new administration understand that directed research is wonderful. We love it. We can do great things with it, but it all dries up if we don't continue the basic research. And I think that's what you were saying, and I really appreciate that too.
And Jonas, what about you in terms of the new administration, encouraging them to do what and focus on what exactly in terms of innovation?
Well, as we think about the areas that could drive really tremendous growth for us, investments in infrastructure, a reduction of regulation, and of course making the labor markets competitive, and also ease of growth in terms of companies and their ability to attract talent. The key issue is going to be reskilling and upskilling individuals that are today outside of the workforce, and the ones that are in the workforce, upskilling them while they're there so that they can continue to evolve. Because right now our employment is at 4.6%, and then we can argue about the workforce participation rate, which is lower than it was before the recession, so give 2%, regardless of which we are following a number of hallmarks of a reasonably tight labor market. There's certainly slack, some are underemployed, some have left the workforce, but the ones that are underemployed and that are outside of the workforce probably at this point don't have the skills to actively and easily participate in a lot of the things that strong growth could generate. So I think that's going to be a systemic approach, both, and I know the panel after us is going to talk about education and the need for education in the long term, but certainly in the short term, to deploy a lot of people into infrastructure projects is going to be challenging, because, speaking to a number of the companies that are involved in big infrastructure projects, their biggest problem is finding infrastructure engineers.
Right.
And that's going to be the reality of hitting into this shortage of talent that can realize so many of those things. So my hope and optimism around this would be that there is a structural and systemic approach around really reskilling the American workforce. So a skills revolution in the budding is what we're hoping for, because we think that truly can drive our competitiveness to untold heights, not only in the short term, but also in the medium and certainly in the long term.
Any questions out there? There we go.
Hi, Magda Lagudas from the College of Engineering at Texas A&M University. I have a question for people who come from industry. As we invest resources in programs to educate engineering undergraduates for innovation and what we call the mindset of entrepreneur, what are the 2 or 3 things that you believe are the most important things in knowledge and skills that we should be focusing on? Thank you.
Who wants to take that?
Carol, you want to go first? No?
Well, I mean, we're probably all working on that same thing. I think it is these skills of learning when you've hit a wall, how do you turn and develop the synthesis for other skills. But I think she wants to hear what you in the business world would tell all of us at universities.
Well, I'll try. So what I would say at university would be, I think you use a term, the inquisitive mind. What we're looking for now as students is, even if you come to a firm like ours and think you know what you want to do, have the ability to say, in 2 years, I may use that skill, but do something different. Yeah. I mean, the difference is coming in, when I joined a firm, you kind of had a career path of 10 years. You knew what you wanted to do in 10 years. Now we want the students to kind of almost make 2-year commitments, because innovation is moving so quickly that we don't want to lock them in for something. We want 2-year commitment, and then in 2 years, you may have an engineering background, but we may want you to do something around analytics or something else. So it's kind of almost this multi-year commitment to continual learning.
True learners.
Yeah. No, so really the balance between the hard skills and the soft skills. So the access, it's going to be more about not only what the hard skills that you come out of school with, but also the soft skills that let you apply it. Because access to knowledge today is ubiquitous. Hard knowledge can be acquired. Experience can be leapfrogged because you have access to an understanding at a much more rapid pace today. So this notion of transferability of skills between industries and between various aspects of what you do within an organization is going to be increasingly important.
Jim, you want to jump in?
Yeah, in the innovation game, generally innovation has zero marginal production costs, and you're trying to insert yourself into a value chain which all has zero marginal production costs. So that's an extraordinarily contended exercise. And so people who have these very sophisticated STEM skills, if they can marry them with the very sophisticated commercialization navigation skills, which are very different in the ideas economy than the traditional economy, that's gold. And the people that do that well because they have extraordinarily valuable tech companies. That's the dance that you do. And that's anyone who brings those to an organization, wow, they're in the C-suite quicker than anybody else.
The really exciting thing about universities, everyone knows this, is the youngest generation coming in every year are most excited about doing this. I walk down the hall and I meet students who have started their first company in their first year, and they're already talking about the second, third, and fourth companies they're going to start. So again, that's another part of the hopeful part, is that when we give them just the tiniest bit, they're ready to leap at it. But I think they want to know what it takes to do that, and they need to have the chance to have a risk, fail, and be successful. So we've got the material and the opportunity, so we just have to get those double T squared, I squared.
Great. On that note, which is very hopeful, we are going to end, and we thank you guys for your questions and your attention.
Thank you. Thank you.